"Old Glass is dead," they said, pocketing his rifle, knife, and hope. Jim Bridger and Fitzgerald fled, leaving their comrade to rot in the wilderness. But under a blood-red moon, a gaunt figure stumbles into the fort, alive, unyielding. "Where's Fitz?" growls Hugh Glass, his voice ablade. How did he defy a grizzly's mauling and a 200-mile crawl through hostile lands? What fuels this ghostly hunter's quest for justice? On August 20th, 1823, Major Andrew Henry's trapping party, 22 men strong, trekked near the Grand River's forks in present-day South Dakota. At dawn, Arikara-Ree warriors, concealed in willow thickets, unleashed a volley of arrows and musket fire. 2 trappers clutched wounded arms, Anderson and Neal crumpled, skulls pierced by lead balls. Jim Bridger, an 18-year-old greenhorn, ducked behind a cottonwood, Kentucky rifle trembling in his grip. It was his first taste of combat. Henry barked orders, "Form line! Return fire!" The trappers knelt, rammed powder and ball into rifle barrels, and fired into the thickets. Smoke stung their eyes. The Ree, numbering at least 30, retreated after 10 minutes, melting into the brush. Henry counted losses, 2 dead, 2 wounded, and horses scattered. "Pack up, move north," he commanded. The party shouldered packs and headed toward the Yellowstone River, eyes scanning the horizon for Ree scouts. Among them was Hugh Glass, a 43-year-old hunter from Pennsylvania, his gray beard thick as bison fur. A musket ball had grazed his thigh in a prior Ree skirmish, but he refused to lag. Bandaged with torn linen, he limped ahead of the column, flintlock rifle in hand, scouting game. Younger trappers, shaken by the ambush, clung to the main group, but Glass, with a companion named Dutton, pressed forward. "Meat don't come to camp," he grunted, waving Dutton to follow. The upper Missouri teemed with grizzly bears, especially along the Grand River. These beasts, often traveling in pairs or trios, weighed up to 600 pounds and charged humans on sight. Their poor eyesight meant detection often came too late for escape. Killing one required precise shots. Muzzle loaders like the .54 caliber Hawken rifle rarely penetrated the grizzly's thick hide and fat with one ball. Trappers dubbed them Old Ephraim, a nod to their fearsome power. Local tribes equated slaying a grizzly with killing an enemy warrior, stringing claws into necklaces as trophies. By August 24th, the 5th day post-ambush, Henry's party camped near a creek. Glass and Dutton ventured a mile ahead, tracking elk signs. Glass cradled his rifle, powder horn slung across his chest, and scanned the underbrush. "Keep your flint primed," he told Dutton, nodding at the younger man's long rifle. The terrain was dense with plum thickets and cottonwoods, ideal for game but also for predators. Glass moved first, parting branches, his moccasins silent on the damp earth. The Ree ambush had heightened tensions. Henry's men knew the region was hostile. Leavenworth's recent defeat against the Ree had emboldened the tribe. Every snapped twig set nerves on edge. Glass, undeterred, prioritized the hunt. The party needed meat to sustain their push to the Yellowstone before winter closed in. His decision to scout ahead despite his wound reflected the trapper's code, provide or perish. As he stepped into a clearing, rifle raised, the stage was set for a brutal encounter that would test his survival beyond the Ree's arrows. On August 24, 1823, Hugh Glass and Dutton hunted a mile ahead of Major Andrew Henry's 22-man trapping party, following a creek near the Grand River in present-day South Dakota. Glass, 43, led with his .54 caliber Hawken rifle, powder horn slung across his chest, and knife sheathed at his belt. A musket ball from a Ree skirmish days earlier had grazed his thigh, wrapped in linen, but he pressed on, scanning for elk tracks. "Keep your flint primed," he told Dutton, who gripped his .50 caliber Kentucky rifle, trailing 10 paces behind. The creek's banks, thick with plum thickets and cottonwoods, hid game and danger alike. Glass parted a dense thicket, stepping into a small clearing by the creek. 10 yards away, a grizzly bear, 6 feet tall on hind legs, guarded 2 cubs. Its matted fur bristled as it snorted, eyes locking on Glass. Thickets blocked escape. He had one shot in his muzzle loader. Raising the rifle, he cocked the hammer, aiming for the bear's chest. The grizzly charged, a 600-pound mass, roaring, claws glinting. Before Glass could fire, its jaws clamped his neck, slamming him to the ground. Blood sprayed as its teeth tore a chunk from his thigh. The bear paused, turning to its cubs. Glass, gasping, clawed the dirt, dragging himself toward the creek on his knees. His rifle lay yards away, useless. The bear lunged again, fangs sinking into his shoulder. It shook him, flipping him onto his back. Glass raised his arms, shielding his face. The bear's teeth crunched through his hand and wrist, bone splintering. He grunted, blood pooling beneath him. Dutton, hearing Glass's screams and the bear's bellows, hacked through the thicket. A cub charged, snarling. Dutton sprinted to the creek, splashing in waist-deep water. He fired his rifle, the ball piercing the cub's skull. It dropped. "Help!" he yelled, ramming a new ball down his barrel. Henry's party, camped a mile off, caught the gunshot and cries. 20 men grabbed rifles, Hawkins and Kentuckys, and ran toward the noise. Bursting into the clearing, they saw the grizzly atop Glass, claws slashing his chest, shredding buckskin and flesh. The bear reared, roaring as the trappers fanned out. "Fire!" Henry shouted. A volley of 10 rifles cracked. Lead balls punched the bear's flank, shoulder, and skull. It staggered, swiping at its wounds, then collapsed, pinning Glass. Blood soaked the sand. The trappers heaved the 600-pound carcass off. Glass lay torn, neck gashed open, shoulder ripped to bone, thigh and chest slashed, hand mangled. Blood matted his gray beard, pooling beneath him. No surgeon traveled with the party. "He won't last the hour," a trapper muttered, eyeing the wounds. They tried lifting him, but Glass screamed, collapsing. His breaths rasped, shallow. Henry ordered a bed made from buffalo robes and wool blankets under a cottonwood. They bound his wounds with torn linen strips, pressing cloth to stem the bleeding. Most expected death by nightfall. Dutton, dripping wet, recounted the attack. "Cub came at me. Shot it from the creek." The men nodded, familiar with grizzlies' ferocity. Tribes called them Old Ephraim, equating their slaying to killing an enemy. The bear's claws, 4 inches long, were pried off for trophies. The second cub had fled. Henry ordered camp set up nearby. "We stay tonight," he said, glancing at Glass, who twitched, moaning. They built a small fire, its smoke faint to avoid scouts, and boiled creek water, dribbling it into Glass's mouth. He choked, barely conscious. Night fell. Glass's groans pierced the silence, keeping the trappers awake. Rifles stayed close, eyes scanning the dark for or more grizzlies. The party knew the region's dangers. Leavenworth's defeat had emboldened the and grizzlies roamed thick along the Grand. Glass's wounds were beyond their skill. They cleaned his gashes with water, but infection loomed. His pulse flickered, weak but persistent. No one spoke of moving him. He couldn't ride or be carried. Henry paced, weighing the party's next move. Winter was closing in, and the Yellowstone's beaver grounds awaited. Glass's survival seemed impossible, yet he clung to life. The trappers whispered of his past, Pennsylvania-born, a sailor before turning hunter, surviving scrapes that killed lesser men. His decision to hunt ahead, despite his thigh wound, reflected the trapper's code, provide or perish. Now that choice had cost him. By dawn, Glass still breathed, defying bets on his death. His eyes, half open, stared blankly. The men checked his bandages, now soaked red. Henry called a meeting, the party's mission clashing with Glass's fate. They needed to move, but abandoning a man went against their unwritten rules. The grizzlies' attack had exposed the frontier's brutality, and Glass's struggle now forced a reckoning for the entire group. On August 25, 1823, the sun rose over the trappers' camp near the Grand River, where Hugh Glass lay on a bed of buffalo robes under a cottonwood. His wounds, neck gashed, shoulder torn to bone, thigh and hand shredded by a grizzly's claws, oozed through blood-soaked linen bandages. Major Andrew Henry, commanding the 22-man trapping party, gathered the men by the creek at dawn. They formed a loose circle, rifles propped against packs, their faces etched with fatigue from a sleepless night of Glass's groans. "We move today," Henry said, voice sharp. Beaver grounds on the Yellowstone won't wait. August was nearly spent and winter loomed. The men knew the frontier's rhythm. July, August, and winter dictated their year's haul. A late start meant empty traps and lean months. Henry's eyes swept the group, landing on Glass, who twitched, feverish, his breath rattling. The grisly attack had left him immobile, unable to stand or speak. "He can't ride," said a trapper named Harris, spitting tobacco into the dirt. "Lifting him tears him open." The men nodded, recalling Glass's screams when they'd tried moving him. A minor wound might have allowed them to lash him to a saddle. A broken leg could be splinted and carried on a travois, poles tied to a horse's flanks. Even a sick man might endure a litter slung between mules, swaying with their steps. But Glass's injuries defied these options. His mangled body bled at the slightest touch, and his fever burned hotter by the hour. The party faced a dilemma: stay and risk the season's trapping, or abandon one of their own. Henry, a pragmatic leader, knew the group's survival hinged on reaching the Yellowstone before ice locked the rivers. Yet, leaving Glass alone clashed with the mountaineers' unspoken code. These men, shaped by the frontier, adapted to its demands, often borrowing from native practices. The Sioux, had a custom for warriors too wounded to move. Comrades left them in a sheltered spot with a rifle, jerky, a buffalo robe, and medicinal roots, banking on recovery. Such tales were known. Wounded Knee Creek in South Dakota bore the name of one such event. Henry proposed a similar course. "Glass stays," he said, adjusting his powder horn. "He fends for himself, or we leave men with him." The men shifted, boots scuffing the sand. Abandoning Glass outright felt cold, even for trappers who valued grit over pity. Glass, 43, was no greenhorn. Pennsylvania-born, a former sailor-turned-hunter, he'd survived scrapes that killed others. Yet his current state, bones fractured, flesh torn, offered no hope. Henry refined his plan. "2 men stay until he dies or walks," he said. "Likely dies. No one bet on recovery. Infection was a matter of time without a surgeon." The camp sat deep in Arikara-Ree territory, where warriors, emboldened by Colonel Leavenworth's defeat in June 1823, stalked intruders. A small group risked ambush or worse. The region teemed with rival tribes: Crow, Blackfeet, Hidatsa, each viewing white men as targets. "A scalp's a scalp," muttered a trapper named Thompson, fingering his .50 caliber Kentucky rifle's trigger guard. Henry called for volunteers. Silence hung heavy. Staying meant facing Ree scouts, grizzlies, or starvation, with slim odds of rejoining the party. The men's eyes dropped, some adjusting possibles bags, others checking flints. Henry sweetened the deal. "Each man gives $1 for those who stay," he said. "We pool $80. The sum, nearly half a year's wages for some, stirred murmurs. Henry likely offered to front the cash, deducting it later from pay. The men tossed coins into a felt hat, their readiness to pay revealing their refusal to volunteer. Ree tracks had been spotted days earlier, and scouts might lurk beyond the valley's cottonwoods, noting the camp's pause. "They're watching," a trapper whispered, scanning the ridge. Glass lay on his robe, breath shallow, eyes half open. His gnarled hands twitched, but he didn't speak, pain silencing him. Jim Bridger, 18, stood at the circle's edge. His .54 caliber Hawken rifle slung over his shoulder, powder horn at his hip. A shy youth, deferential to veterans, he felt the frontier's cruelty anew. Glass's suffering pierced his reserve. Stepping forward, he cleared his throat. "I reckon I'll stay," he said, voice barely carrying. Glass's eyes flickered, a spark of hope, then darted across the group, seeking more than a boy's aid. Bridger, the youngest trapper, had no scars to match Glass's, but his offer broke the silence. No one else spoke. The men avoided Glass's gaze, some kicking dirt, others tightening pack straps. The grisly attack and re-ambush had drained their nerve. Silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Finally, John Fitzgerald, a lean trapper in his 30s, stepped up, adjusting his bullet pouch. "I reckon I can stand it a while, Major, if Jim can," he said, voice flat. The circle dissolved. Each man would get $40, a steep sum, but the others shrugged. If Fitzgerald and Bridger risked their lives, that was their burden. "Pack up," Henry ordered. "We move at noon." By midday, Henry's party, 19 men, 12 horses, and 6 mules, headed north, dust trailing their steps toward the Yellowstone. Bridger and Fitzgerald stayed, setting up a lean-to with willow branches and a buffalo robe to shield Glass from the sun. They boiled creek water in a tin cup, crumbling jerky into it for broth, and spooned it into Glass's mouth. He choked, swallowing drops. They cleaned his wounds with cold water, peeling back crusted linen to rinse gashes, and swatted flies from his bandages. "Keep your rifle loaded," Fitzgerald told Bridger, nodding at the thickets. They avoided fires, fearing smoke would draw Ree scouts, and kept their Hawkins primed, barrels resting on logs. Every snapped twig set them on edge. For 2 days, August 26th and 27th, they tended Glass. He clung to life, neither better nor worse. His groans faded to whimpers, but fever scorched his skin. Bridger knelt, dribbling water onto Glass's cracked lips, while Fitzgerald paced, scanning the horizon. They alternated watches, one napping with a rifle across his chest, the other crouched by Glass. The $40 felt trivial now, with no comrades to share the strain. They ate jerky, saving their powder for defense. "Rea'd love 3 scalps," Fitzgerald muttered, checking his flint. On August 27th, Fitzgerald filled a canteen at the creek and froze, moccasin prints, fresh in the mud, likely Ree. He hissed to Bridger, "Indians close. We're done if we stay." Bridger, wiping Glass's brow, paused, eyes wide. "He's still breathing," he said, voice trembling. Fitzgerald crouched, pressing fingers to Glass's neck. Pulses weak. "He's gone by tomorrow." He stood, slinging his rifle. "We can't save him. We stay. We die." Bridger glanced at Glass, whose eyes fluttered, unfocused. The youth's inexperience buckled under Fitzgerald's insistence. "We tell Henry he's dead," Fitzgerald said. "No one checks." Bridger nodded, head low. Glass lay semi-conscious, unable to resist. Fitzgerald saw a hitch. Returning to Fort Henry without Glass's gear would raise suspicion. Henry might expect the dead man's kit, or Glass might owe debts. "Take his stuff," Fitzgerald said. They stripped Glass of his .54 caliber Hawken, powder horn, bullet pouch, sheath knife, and flint and steel. Bridger tucked the knife in his belt, fingers lingering on the handle. Fitzgerald rolled the rifle in a blanket. "Move quiet," he whispered, checking the stars. That night, August 27th, they slipped away, leaving Glass on the buffalo robe, defenseless in torn buckskins. They moved fast, skirting the creek to blur their tracks, rifles gripped. Ree territory demanded stealth. A cough could draw arrows. They traveled light, chewing jerky, avoiding fires. By August 30th, they reached Henry's party near the Yellowstone, slipping into the column. "Glass is gone," Fitzgerald told Henry, handing over the rifle and knife. "Died 2 days back." Henry took the gear, face unreadable, and waved them to camp. The party marched on, winter pressing. Bridger, quieter than before, carried Glass's knife, its bone handle heavy in his belt. Fitzgerald pocketed his $40, eyes forward. Glass, left with only a robe and his wounds, faced the wilderness alone. His fate, a question none dared ask. On August 27, 1823, Hugh Glass awoke on a buffalo robe by the Grand River. Alone. His .54 caliber Hawken rifle, powder horn, bullet pouch, knife, and flint and steel were gone, stolen by Jim Bridger and John Fitzgerald. His buckskins hung in tatters, wounds from a grizzly's claws, and teeth crusted with blood. Fever burned his skin, and his mangled hand and shoulder throbbed. No food, no allies, only the creek's murmur and a vast prairie. He lay still, breath shallow, then clenched his jaw. Rage at his betrayers sharpened his mind. He would survive, find Fort Kiowa, and confront those who left him to die. Glass scanned the creek bank, spotting clusters of chokecherries. He dragged himself forward, inching on his elbows, thigh wounds splitting with each move. He plucked berries, sucking their juice, the tart liquid easing his parched throat. Fort Kiowa, the nearest white outpost, lay 200 miles southeast across open plains. Staying meant starvation. Moving risked death by Ree warriors who'd scalp a lone, crippled man for sport. Glass chose to move. He began crawling, robe trailing, toward the high plains. The prairie stretched endless, dotted with sagebrush and buffalo grass. Any Ree scout could spot him, a crawling figure in torn buckskins. Glass hugged low ground, skirting ridges, pausing to listen for hoofbeats. His wounds slowed him. Each yard took minutes. By dusk, he'd covered a mile, collapsing in a dry gully. Hunger gnawed. He chewed grass stems, spitting out fibers, and slept fitfully, shivering under the robe. Days blurred. On the third day, Glass glimpsed wolves circling a buffalo calf, separated from its herd. He lay flat, watching the pack lunge, teeth tearing the calf's flank. Blood pooled as it fell. The wolves fed, then scattered at Glass's approach. He crawled to the carcass, hands trembling. Without a knife, he tore at the raw flesh with his teeth, gagging but swallowing. He stuffed strips of meat into his buckskin shirt, the blood soaking through. Strength trickled back. He crawled on, the meat sustaining him. Glass followed game trails, moving southeast. His wounds scabbed, though infection swelled his hand. He drank from streams, avoiding open water where Ree might patrol. By early September, he reached the Cheyenne River, its banks muddy but navigable. He shuffled along its course, using driftwood as a crutch, his pace quickening as fever ebbed. The Cheyenne led to the Missouri River, a lifeline to Fort Kiowa. Glass pressed on, driven by visions of Fitzgerald and Bridger, their faces fueling each step. Near the Missouri, Glass's strength grew. He walked, limping, no longer crawling. Scavenging kept him alive. Roots, insects, a dead fish washed ashore. The plains teemed with danger. Ree, Blackfeet, and grizzlies roamed. He moved at dawn and dusk, hiding midday in brush. By late September, Fort Kiowa's log walls appeared, 200 miles from where he'd been abandoned. Traders at the post, run by the Missouri Fur Company, gaped at the scarred, gaunt man. "Glass thought you was dead," one said, offering jerky and a blanket. Glass ate, said little, and rested, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Days later, a keelboat loaded with trappers passed, heading upriver. Glass, still weak, joined them, bartering labor for passage. His wounds prevented rowing, so he disembarked near the Mandan villages to lighten the boat, planning to cut overland. Alone again, he carried a borrowed knife and blanket, his buckskins stiff with dirt. Near the villages, 2 Ree women spotted him. Glass ducked behind a cottonwood, but they shouted, summoning warriors. Hooves thundered. Glass, unable to run, gripped the knife, bracing for a fight. 2 Mandan hunters galloped up, waving off the Ree. They gestured for Glass to follow, leading him to Fort Tilton, a small trading post. There, traders shared news. The Ree had ambushed the keelboat days later, killing all aboard. Glass, spared by chance, sat by a fire, chewing pemmican. His vengeance burned hotter. Bridger and Fitzgerald were with Henry, likely at his Yellowstone fort. That night, October 1st, Glass left Fort Tilton, refusing rest. He carried a .50 caliber rifle, knife, flint and steel, and a small pouch of jerky, gifts from the Mandans. Glass trekked alone, following the Missouri to its confluence with the Yellowstone, then up the Yellowstone toward the Big Horn. The 1,000-mile journey spanned 38 days through Ree and Crow lands where warriors and grizzlies lurked. He traveled by night, hiding in ravines by day, avoiding fires. He shot a rabbit once, eating it raw to save powder. His rifle, primed daily, gave confidence. The knife stayed sharp. Scars tightened his skin, but his limp faded. Rage drove him, every mile a step toward Henry's fort. By late October, Glass reached the fort, a cluster of log cabins by the Yellowstone. He staggered through the gate, beard matted, eyes blazing. Trappers froze, rifles half raised. "Glass?" one gasped. "Heard you was gone under." Glass ignored them, scanning for Bridger and Fitzgerald. His vengeance, kindled by betrayal, had carried him through starvation, wounds, and hostile lands. The fort's walls marked the end of his odyssey and the start of a reckoning. On a biting October night in 1823, Jim Bridger trudged through the frost-crusted yard of Major Andrew Henry's fort along the Yellowstone River, his .54 caliber Hawken rifle slung over his shoulder. The 18-year-old trapper, returning empty-handed from a hunt, led his horse to the stable, its hooves crunching ice. A warped red moon hung low, casting the fort's log walls in faint crimson. Bridger's moccasins scraped as he neared his flat-roofed cabin. A shadow stirred by the split log fence, a skeletal figure, silver beard glinting, eyes sharp as a hawk's. Bridger's heart stopped. Hugh Glass. 6 weeks prior, on August 27th, Bridger and John Fitzgerald had abandoned Glass by the Grand River, convinced his grisly mauled body, neck gashed, shoulder and thigh shredded, hand crushed, wouldn't survive. They'd taken his .54 caliber Hawken, sheath knife, powder horn, bullet pouch, and flint and steel, claiming he'd died. Bridger, swayed by Fitzgerald's insistence, had followed, the stolen knife now heavy in his belt. Guilt had shadowed him since, a weight heavier than the $40 he'd earned. Now, Glass stood before him, scars twisting his face, a living rebuke. Bridger's throat tightened, words lost. Glass stepped forward, boots silent, and gripped Bridger's shoulder, fingers digging like iron. Bridger flinched, expecting a ghostly touch, but felt warm flesh. Relief flashed. Glass was alive, then twisted into fear. His betrayal, buried in lies to Henry, was laid bare. Glass shoved him against the fence, splintered logs biting Bridger's back. Raising anew, .50 caliber Kentucky rifle, Glass roared, "Speak up, young, quick before I kill you!" The shout cracked the fort's stillness, echoing off cabins. Doors swung open, trappers stumbling out, buckskins unlaced, rifles clutched. "Glass?" one choked. "Heard you was dead." They surged forward, slapping his scarred arms, gripping his hands. "Hiya, old coon, where'd you come from?" Bridger stood pinned, pulse hammering. He'd trusted Fitzgerald's pragmatism, abandoning a man for fear of re-scalps. Now, facing Glass's fury, he chose to stand firm. His lips parted, but heavy boots interrupted. The trappers parted as Henry, broad-shouldered, strode in, his Hawken at his hip. "What's going on?" Henry's voice sliced the chatter. His gaze flicked from Bridger's ashen face to Glass's raised rifle, then held on Glass. He stepped close, pushing the barrel upward. "No shooting in my fort. You two, my cabin. We settle this inside." The crowd trailed to Henry's cabin, a low log structure with a sod roof and a single elk-hide window. Inside, a fire glowed in a stone hearth, shadows dancing on plank walls hung with traps and pelts. Henry sat at a rough-hewn table, pointing Bridger and Glass to stand. Glass propped his rifle by the door, keeping his knife sheathed, its bone handle visible. Bridger set his Hawken down, hands open. Henry crossed his arms. "Talk," he said, eyes narrowing. Bridger swallowed, voice steady despite his shaking hands. "Left him August 27th by the Grand. Thought he was gone. Grizzly tore him bad. Fitzgerald said Reed'd take our scalps if we stayed. Took his gear, rifle, knife, powder, flint. Caught you at the Yellowstone. Said he died." He met Henry's gaze, then Glass's, hiding nothing. The confession unburdened him, though shame clung like damp buckskin. He braced for Glass's reaction, expecting a blade or fist. Henry shifted, turning to Glass, who stood rigid, scars stark in the firelight. Glass spoke, voice like gravel, eyes fixed past Bridger. "Crawled 200 miles to Kiowa. Ate berries, wolf killed buffalo. Mandan saved me from Ree at Tilton. Walked 1,000 miles here." He detailed his trek, sucking choke cherries, gnawing raw meat, dodging Ree and grizzlies, surviving a keelboat massacre. Each fact landed heavy, the trappers outside the open door whispering. Glass's voice stayed flat, no plea or rage, but his hands clenched. "What's Fitz, he asked, sharp as a flint strike. Henry leaned back, fingers tapping the table. Fitzgerald took his $40, headed to Fort Atkinson, down the Missouri, near the Platte, long way off. Glass's jaw tightened, but he nodded once. Henry offered, "Your job's open, Glass. Trap with us." Glass shook his head, gaze distant. "You're sending letters to the settlements." "I'll carry 'em," he said. Henry paused, then agreed, adding, "4 men go with you. Safer. Leave end of February." He glanced at a scratched calendar, February 28th, 1824. Bridger stood silent, stunned by Glass's restraint. "What's Fitz?" Was forgiveness, however curt, shifting blame to Fitzgerald. The trappers outside drifted away, muttering. None faulted Bridger. No one had stayed with Glass as long as he had, and none had volunteered at all. If Glass, the betrayed, spared him, they saw no cause to judge. The frontier's unwritten law was brutal. Survival outranked guilt, and errors faded fast in a world where each man was his own judge. Yet Bridger's shame endured, a scar deeper than Glass's. Over the winter, Bridger avoided Glass, who took light duties, repairing traps, scraping hides while his wounds healed. The fort hummed with Glass's story, his 1,000-mile odyssey, a tale traded over fires. Bridger, once a deferential boy, grew reserved, his caution turning outward. He watched the veterans, seeing their self-interest clearly now. When a new trapper fumbled loading a hawken, Bridger knelt beside him. "Ram the ball tight," he said, guiding the rod. He took night watches, hunted in blizzards, carried extra pelts for the weary. Glass's knife, still in his belt, pressed against his hip, a reminder of his lapse. Glass prepared for his journey, his limp fading by January 1824. He cleaned his Kentucky rifle, oiled the lock, and packed a buffalo robe, jerky, and a possibles bag with flint, steel, and .50 caliber balls. The 4 trappers assigned to him, young men with hawkens and pack-horses, checked saddles and powder horns. Glass worked alone, sharpening his knife, testing its edge on leather. His vengeance for Fitzgerald simmered, undimmed by time. He spoke little, but his eyes tracked the fort's gate, as if already on the Missouri. Bridger's transformation deepened. He'd been a youth, obedient to men like Fitzgerald, whose logic had led him astray. Glass's return burned that away. He began small acts of duty, sharing jerky, mending a comrade's moccasins. When a trapper fell ill, Bridger boiled willow bark, spooning the bitter tea himself. "Swallow it," he urged, voice firm. The fort's men noticed, calling him Gabe with a nod. The name, echoing Glass, tethered his change to his mistake, a private vow to prioritize others. The Ree, like the Blackfoot and Cree in later decades, valued warrior honor, often sparing those who showed courage, as Glass had in his trek. Bridger, learning this through traded tales, saw his own path clearer. Duty, not fear, defined a man. His error with Glass, born of youth and trust, became his forge. By February he led hunts, his hawken steady, his calls crisp. "Stay low, check the wind," he told greenhorns, eyes scanning for retracts. On February 28, 1824, Glass left the fort, letters in his pack, rifle slung, 4 trappers at his side. Bridger stood by the gate, watching the horses kick dust. Glass didn't look back. His quest for Fitzgerald drove him, a fire no winter could douse. Bridger, spared but changed, felt the knife's weight. He'd become his own man, answerable to himself. Years later, as Old Gabe, Bridger's name meant bravery, generosity, and care for the reckless or weak, his debt to Glass etched in every act. Hugh Glass's scars marked his survival, his vengeance unquenched, as he pursued Fitzgerald beyond the fort. Jim Bridger, reshaped by guilt, forged a life of duty, his name, Old Gabe, carrying the weight of his redemption. Their paths diverged, but the frontier bound them, each man carved by choices under a blood-red moon. The wilds held their story, whispered in campfires, a saga of betrayal, grit, and the unyielding drive to endure.